Well, here I am again. This is Pastor Ronald L. discussing my book, The Deep Things of God, Reflections of a Jackleg Preacher. I'm today here with my electronic version as we're going to talk about chapter 24, This Well is Deep. Chapter 24 was the last chapter that I wrote, even though it's the second to the last chapter in the book. And it's a chapter that I had to write in order to complete the book, because it deals with the most troubling of all the deep things. The issue is, if we're honest, that as we express all of our thoughts about our faith in God and our understandings about who God is, and certainly the most important attribute of God, which is love, that we still have a very difficult time understanding why, since we agree that God is love and loving, why is there so much pain? Why is there so much hatred expressed through parts of God's creation? Why is it so difficult for us as human beings to treat each other well, to treat each other kindly, to forgive? And then why do we cause so much hurt through torture and the most evil kinds of actions that you can imagine human beings taking? Pain, when properly used, is an important part of God's design. We can imagine, for example, if God had chosen to have a little bell go off when we had a toothache, for example, that we would be inclined to let the bell ring and would probably never go and attend to the tooth. But the fact that it causes pain forces us to act. It's one of the reasons why I made the strange statement that I did in the book about pain as a gift. I talked about God giving the gift of pain as something that causes us to act, to move, to do what is necessary in order to bring about change. So in a way I can understand pain, but pain that has no redeeming purpose, pain that has its only reason to inflict on someone else the greatest hurt and the greatest harm. Now that is hard to understand, and it's equally hard to understand, as we discuss in that chapter, why it appears that God does not intervene. Why doesn't God simply say, stop, enough? It has to end. So I wrestled with this idea for a long, long time, many, many years, and even as I was writing this book. And that's what led to the title, This Well is Deep. This book is about the deep things of God, and we broke them down, as you know, into different categories and groups, and we studied them in turn. But we come back to this point after we've gone through all the other ideas. This particular idea about God and God's creation stays with us. Human beings inflict pain through torture and abuse. Why would we do that? Why is that part of the design? Why did God not design us in such a way that we would reach a limit where we could not inflict the pain? Most of us, ordinary, normal human beings, would not do such a thing. But there are those on the fringes and those who push creation to its extreme who very well would do that. I only have to mention Hitler, for example, and other notorious names in order to provide evidence, if evidence is needed, for this characteristic of human beings. Why doesn't God answer when the righteous cry for deliverance from evil? Why were some people who say that they knew God nevertheless allowed to suffer the worst kind of abuse at the hands of other human beings? Habakkuk, as we point out in the chapter, raised the same question Habakkuk chapter 1 verse 2 says, "How long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen, or cry out to you violence, but you do not save?" Some people suggest that God does not act because God simply doesn't want to get involved or cannot get involved, that God created and then withdrew for a well-deserved rest. That when God rested, some would say God's activity ended, or God, perhaps others suggest, was unable to act further after having done the initial work required in the creative process. They would say that God withdrew. Others would say that God is very much concerned but unable. In other words, God is not omnipotent. God is not all powerful. But there are some things that are even beyond the ability of God. Others go to the other extreme, one that causes us chills, and one with which I totally disagree, and that is that God is not benevolent. God is not good, and so God does not care. So it must be something else, and that's what we wrestle with in this chapter when we say this well is deep. As I wrote the chapter, I found that I reached a limit that was brought about by my lack of ability with prose, where I couldn't find the words to quite express what I think is really going on here. And that led me to try to write a poem, to express these ideas in poetic form. And that poem was called "The Inside God." I want to read that now, though you can hear the entire poem in context, of course, if you choose to listen to the audio book or listen to the entire chapter. The poem was called "The Inside God." Where was God in the Holocaust? In the middle passage with millions lost? When you keep on losing and cannot win, is that when God is hiding in? Way down in my soul, working to make me whole and rescue me from temptation round, all of us down on the ground. Does God in me know God in you? Does the God know God in others too? Is God in all, or just one sect, especially chosen, the divine elect? Do evil people have a spark of God residing in their heart? I know my God resides within, because sometimes I feel something akin to love, or at least a good feeling toward my human peer, and not just when I'm kneeling at the altar with them near. A good feeling that replaces the fear I naturally feel when someone's feet come near my heels and remind me that my space is invaded and defaced by someone not my gender or race or size, someone whose eyes have seen other horizons. God within me makes me accept, despite the feelings long kept buried in my subconscious brain, the "excuse me" proffered tentatively by a member of the human domain who no longer seems so low and mean. The God within me urges your God inside to act in concert, to override the malevolent urges, to change the courses of history from bad desires to goodness, from base and low to movement higher, from wishes to malign to benevolent designs. I want to stop the poem there, because that really gets to the point, I think, of resolution that I had to reach. I'd be very interested in knowing what yours is. That God clearly does act, but oftentimes the actions of God come about when the collective people who have a sense of God, the collection of people who have a sense of God, when that collection acts and moves, when that is the God that I sense and in whom I move and have my being, communicates and works with the God that is in you. It's not the idea that God is only within us, but rather that God is indeed in us. And to the extent that we allow God who resides in us to work with the God who resides in others, we reach the point where collectively then we cry out. We cry out. And we then are the voice of God. Enough. Hitler. Enough. Desperate. Enough. Those who would do evil. Enough. Stop. This must end. Thus saith the Lord. This well is deep. What do you think? Well, if you'd like to see and hear the entire chapter, then or purchase a hard copy or the Kindle version of the Deep Things of God, then go to Amazon.com, or if you want to purchase and download the audio version of the companion sermons, then you can go to Ronald L. Glenn, no spaces, ronaldlglenn.bandcamp.com. We look forward to talking with you further. This well is deep.